They had never seen the world, but they tried to draw it. No planes, no satellites. There's no way to know what lay beyond the mountains or across the sea. Yet somehow, thousands of years ago, someone unrolled a scroll and sketched what they believed was the entire Earth. But what they included and what they didn't will leave you speechless. 2023 marks 500 years since the publication of the very first map of the world, which had one hell of a journey to get to us. In fact, you could say that the invention of the world map didn't happen just 500 years ago, but several thousand years ago. When our ancestors sailed around the Mediterranean Sea, spied distant lands, and tried to make sense of where they were in relation to everything else. Before paper, ancient cartographers recorded their discoveries on whatever materials they had available: astraca, stone tablets, papyrus, leather, and even wax tablets. Unfortunately, most of these early examples of cartography have been lost to time. This map isn't widely known because it took so long to leave China, not being copied into Latin until the 13th century. His world map, Kitab al-Art, translated as the Book of the Marvels, was commissioned by the King of Sicily and shows the known world at the time. Again, we see 3 continents, but the accuracy of the shapes is impressive, albeit divided by the prime meridian line. For the Aztecs, the whole world was in one landmass. For the Greeks, it was divided into 3. They relied on sailors' stories, myths, and calculations, which could be wildly inaccurate. This makes sense when you consider that measuring the circumference of the Earth in those days meant counting the steps along a straight road. It was until the Age of Discovery in the 15th century that Europeans began exploring the world firsthand instead of relying on second-hand accounts. It became popular among sailors, especially because it added the mythical islands of the Blessed, a haven for the souls of the virtuous. Another reason people wanted to explore the seas was to find precious metals like gold and silver, which had high value back in Europe. Some believe there were massive gold mines in India, so much so that when Christopher Columbus reached the United States, he thought he was in India, and so did everyone back home. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. That's why the first inhabitants of these lands were called Indians. It wasn't until 4 years later that Amerigo Vespucci realized that they had found a new continent. But it wasn't smooth sailing. Navigating by the stars or using dead reckoning, which estimates location based on speed and direction, proved unreliable. The result was the first published world map in 1494, followed by another version in 1498. This map revolutionized cartography. It marked the beginning of a new age of discovery. It gave people a tangible representation of the world they inhabited, and it sparked a passion for exploration that would lead to the conquest and colonization of the New World. Sailors would regularly miss their destination by hundreds of miles, landing in places no European had ever seen. Since then, technology has improved dramatically. We have satellites that orbit the planet taking pictures of everything down below. We can measure distances accurately and plot coordinates with precision. But maybe that's not such a good thing, because all these advances have given us a distorted view of the world. A single photograph taken from space shows the Earth as a blue marble floating in the darkness of space, reminding us that our planet is just one small part of a much bigger universe. But our maps don't show that. They cut the world into separate pieces and label them Europe, Africa, Asia. They turn the Earth into a patchwork quilt of countries, each separated by borders and divided by differences. Maybe it's time we had a new world map, one that showed the Earth as one big marble, one that showed all the countries as part of the same planet, one that helped us see the world in a new way. Imagine that. Setting sail to discover India and ending up in Florida, which isn't easy to do in mountainous or forested areas. Not to mention the tools they had weren't exactly advanced. Sometimes they'd use odometers, devices that count wheel rotations, but these often break. Sometimes they'd use knotted ropes, other times they'd use sticks and protractors. And sometimes they just guessed. For everyone else, it was fragmented until we put it all back together. But the Greeks weren't as lucky, and their measurement was way off. Even so, they had some ingenious methods. Eratosthenes, the head librarian at Alexandria, managed to calculate the Earth's circumference in 240 B. See? By measuring the angle of a shadow in 2 different cities on the same day. He knew that in Alexandria, the sun's rays hit directly overhead at noon, casting no shadow. But in Syene, now Aswan, a well in the center of town still cast a shadow. He measured the shadow's angle to be 7 degrees 12 minutes. He then calculated that since the Earth is a sphere, a full circle is 360 degrees. And because 7.5 degrees represents 1/70th of the circle, the Earth's circumference is 70 times the distance between Alexandria and Syene, and voila, you got a number quite close to the real thing. Al-Ignisi is also credited with creating the first world map projection where east is on the right and west on the left, a convention still used today. Because of the circular nature of the globe, this means that Asia is split in half with Eastern Asia at the top and the Middle East in the bottom right. It also means that parts of Europe appear close to Asia, which doesn't make sense if you look at a modern map. But the projection was necessary to show the entire world on a flat surface without cutting anything out. To solve this problem, medieval mapmakers would add something called a Miller-S hump to show the correct relative size of Europe and Africa, which you can clearly see here. It shows East Asia pretty accurately, but the rest of the world is a little off. As far as we know, it's the oldest surviving map to depict Antarctica. Unfortunately, only a small part of the original remains, because it was used to make a patchwork quilt for a sultaness' wife. Still, enough remains to show the Americas, Australia, Africa, and Asia in remarkable detail. There's India, Central Asia, Egypt, Arabia, and Greece. Yet again, we see the 3 continents model, which may have been widespread along trade routes. Also absent are any countries in South America, although some scholars believe the Inca Empire may have created its own map. Sadly, no trace of it has survived. But there are some interesting exceptions, such as this piece of pottery found at the ancient Greek city of Aria. It might have been because of the way ships disappear at sea. First the hull, and then the masts, suggesting a curved surface. Or maybe they watched the stars. When the Greek astronomer Anaxagoras noticed that during the winter solstice, the sun never dipped below the horizon while sailing along the northern coast of Euboea, an island in the Aegean Sea, by simple deduction he concluded that the Earth must be a sphere. While he didn't create a map, his student Anaximander probably built on his ideas to create his own map. And without them, we may not have had world maps for thousands more years. It dates back to around 600 BC and shows a stylized view of the world divided into 3 continents. These boundaries aren't based on geography, but rather mythology. Europe ends at the Strait of Gibraltar, Africa at the Egyptian border, and Asia at the Indus River. A few centuries later, the region was conquered by Alexander the Great, who led his army across the Indus. After returning home, he told stories about the wonders he saw, including elephants with riders on their backs. So perhaps it was his tales that inspired the next great cartographer, Anaximander. He created a world map in the mid-500s BC that is famous for being the first known depiction of a spherical Earth. Unfortunately, we don't have the original because all we have are fragments of other maps copied from it. The detail we can see tells us 2 things. First, the circular shape of the Earth wasn't controversial at this point. And second, the lack of the Americas. We can see the Nile River running through Africa, the Caspian Sea in Asia, and the Aegean Sea separating Europe and Asia Minor. But there's no North America or South America. How did they know the Earth was round? Fast forward to the 7th century AD, and we find the next notable contender. A world map by the Chinese monk and astronomer Yi Jing. The next big leap in mapping came when Arab geographers started creating more accurate maps in the 8th century, such as this one by Al-Igrisi in 1154. In 1424, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis combined earlier maps with his own travels to create the next major world map. So we've come full circle from the earliest map showing 3 continents. It's divided by geography and mythology to the most detailed map yet showing every continent on a globe. There was just one problem. While these maps were getting better and better, they weren't actually accurate. They didn't have any hard data or measurements. For example, the Egyptians measured the Earth's circumference in 250 BC and got a number very close to the actual value. But as we saw, even with all these methods, the maps were riddled with inaccuracies. To help navigators stay on course, a Portuguese monk named Frei Morolipi created a world map in 1440 that included America and accurately depicted Africa and Asia. After finding gold in Spain and Portugal, King Henry, the navigator of Portugal, decided he wanted a map of his empire. So he hired German cartographer Johann Ruysch to make one. So the next time you look at a world map, remember that the first one was made 500 years ago, piecing together myths, stories, and guesses. Thank you so much for watching.